All right, well, let's go right ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's program to discuss Patagonia's new stunning film, Public Trust. We hope that you enjoyed this film, and we hope that you and your families are safe and healthy during this COVID-19 pandemic that we're all living through. We would have loved to have been with you in person this evening, but we appreciate you adjusting and being online with us this evening for the program. My name is Todd Martin. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. NRCM is a nonprofit membership organization restoring, conserving, and protecting Maine's environment now and for future generations. For more than 60 years, NRCM has been fighting to protect the places and the way of life that make Maine so special. NRCM harnesses the power of the law, science, and more than 25,000 members and supporters who help advance our work. And our offices are located in Augusta, just steps from the State House. Joining me this evening to discuss Patagonia's new film, Public Trust, is Josh Ewing, the Executive Director of the Friends of Cedar Mesa. Welcome, Josh. Also joining us is Lois Norrgard she's the National Field Organizer for the Alaska Wilderness League. Welcome, Lois. And Alex Falconer, who's the Director of Government Relations for the Save the Boundary Waters campaign, who will be joining us momentarily. So before we get started with tonight's presentation, just a couple of quick notes about the Zoom technology that we're using tonight. I'm sure we're all familiar with how Zoom works at this point. It's been a few months. So first thing, tonight's webinar is being recorded. You'll all receive a link via email tomorrow afternoon from me with a link to watch it and share it with friends. Your video and your audio is disabled by design. You'll only be able to see and hear our panelists this evening. But if you have a question, we would love to hear it. Please type your question in the Q&A box, which can be found on the bottom ribbon of your Zoom screen. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end of our presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Josh Ewing from the Friends of Cedar Mesa to talk about the fight to protect Bears Ears National Monument, which we heard a lot about in the film. So Josh, take it away.
Hey, good to be with you all virtually. I'm coming to you from Bluff, Utah, which is right on the border of Bears Ears National Monument. In my first slide here, you can kind of see, a bird's eye view of the monument and one of the more than 100,000 cultural sites that are within its boundaries. And I'll just start off by acknowledging that all the work that Friends of Cedar Mesa does, and even where I'm standing, which is private land now, was once ancestral lands for many, many tribes. In our area, it's the Ute, the Paiute, the Navajo, and more than 20 Pueblo tribes of New Mexico. And we're honored to be able to work on trying to protect those sacred lands. And I don't use the word public lands very much anymore. Even when this film was created, I used that term more often. But it kind of belies where our public lands in the United States came from. Most of them were stolen, sometimes by homicide, from Native American people. And while they are managed by the federal government now and owned technically by all Americans, I really see it as our trust to help take care of these lands, our public trust to take care of these lands on behalf of Native American people. So on your next slide, you'll see kind of how I got into working on Bears Ears. I'm a rock climber. I love to do things that other people think are crazy, but I fortunately live in one of the best places in the world to do that in the state of Utah. And this was actually shot for a Patagonia catalog. And I got to do a big shout out to Patagonia. I mean, there's a lot of great companies that have supported the Resource Council and Friends of Cedar Mesa, folks like the North Face, but there really isn't a company that puts their money where their mouth is, their actions where their words are, more than Patagonia. And I think that comes through in the film, but it certainly comes through in how much they support grassroots organizations like those represented on the call today. In the next screen, you'll see the little town that I live in. Which is Teeny Bluff. And that's why I like to be on these virtual things, is because there's no way this little town can support and protect a place as important as Bears Ears. But it is awesome to live here because I get to look out the back window of my house, or I'm standing in the Bears Ears Education Center right now. We look out the front window at Bears Ears National Monument. But you'll see, coming up in this next slide, a little bit more about where Bears Ears is. It's in the southeast corner of Utah, but really that border is an arbitrary border, created when the United States was created, which is like a second in time of Native American culture. And this shows how particularly the Pueblo, the ancestral Pueblo people migrated out of this area some 800 years ago, but they still have deep spiritual connections to this landscape. And it's one of those things that is such an honor to work on, and it was such a great piece to be part of protecting Bears Ears. Because this landscape has been proposed for protection for more than 110 years, since before the Antiquities Act. But on the next slide, you'll see that it was really the efforts of the tribes whose lands these were in the beginning that what made it over the finish line. And I say that's mostly because, Utah is such a crazy place to do politics. Even though anywhere else, and I literally mean like outer Mongolia, this would have been a national park 50 years ago, but because of Utah politics, it took an exceptional leader like President Obama and exceptional leadership from the tribes to get this done. So I think, Bears Ears really is now at the forefront of protecting really important places in the United States. The next few slides, and you can go pretty fast through these, Todd, just show how remarkably beautiful this place is, full of culture, 1,000-year-old dwellings where people lived and had their spiritual lives. This slide here will show you some imagery that was put on the walls to pass on messages to future generations. So, it's a place that's just imbued with living culture as well as just being exceptionally beautiful. And it's certainly deserving of protection. It's deserving of all of us working on protecting it. And you can just see the level. I mean, this house is literally 900 years old. I mean, my house doesn't look that good, and it's like 20 years old, right? So it's a place that we're working on protecting. The tribes proposed protecting 1.9 million acres. President Obama protected 1.3 million acres, and then President Trump attempted to reduce it by more than 85%, really due to oil and gas reserves. And that's really what we're fighting today in court. You learned about that a bit in the movie. But if you see the next slide, you'll literally see an oil rig that's not far from the boundaries of Bears Ears. That this area is being targeted for oil and gas and uranium development by industry that has a lot of sway right now, right? And so really the thing is, how do we push back against that sway? How do we use our collective voices, our collective power to really make a difference going forward? And I think that's what the public trust video really helped people understand, is kind of some of this history and how important it is for us to all to be engaged. And the next slide will give you a really scary image. This is just outside of Bears Ears National Monument. All of those colorful squares are oil and gas leases that this administration has attempted to let out in just the last 2 years. So Friends of Cedar Mesa is going to court to try to stop this. The only reason this picture is not inside of Bears Ears is because of President Obama and what he did, and our court actions holding that at bay. But this is what is happening today, and we're trying to fight back against. In the next slide, you're going to see some of the collateral damage. We were on the Bears Ears was on the front cover of National Geographic. You probably have all heard about Bears Ears, and it's bringing a ton of new people here. And it's fine to come explore it. It's an inspiring place, but it can't handle the number of people without resources. And so we really have a downside, which is the number of people that are here today. And so that's a lot what Friends of Cedar Mesa is working on, is educating people how to visit this area respectfully. You can see in the next slide, it shows you how much the visitation to Bears Ears has increased over time. So about 10 years ago, it was accelerating at a crazy pace. We were freaked out about it, but then all the controversy around Bears Ears, especially with the reduction by President Trump, has really driven an unbelievable, unsustainable increase in visitation. So we're really trying to get on top of that. The next slide shows you the inside of the Bears Ears Education Center, which we built, we fundraised for and built in a matter of 9 months because the agencies weren't going to even have a visitor center for this huge area. So we tried to, get a visitor center going to hold the line in the meantime. And we're also on the next slide, you're going to see some of the work we're doing on the ground. This is with the Acoma Ancestral Lands Corps, but we're actually working on visitor impacts at cultural sites like this one, working directly with the tribes. And the next slide shows you a group of Pueblo governors that we got to take out to see some of the cultural sites in Bears Ears, working closely with those groups to really make sure their voices are heard in this entire process. So, you know, I went pretty quick there. I know you got to learn a lot more about this in the film. I'm excited to answer questions. But on this last slide, I'll leave you with a little bit of a point, which is that Bears Ears is on the ballot. And not just Bears Ears, but Acadia, not just Bears Ears, but Yosemite, not just Bears Ears, but the Boundary Waters, not just Bears Ears, but the Arctic, right? There are a lot of things on the ballot. And as a 501c3, I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but I will tell you, you ought to do a little research before you cast your ballot this year, because there are some important things on the ballot, and hopefully watching the film has really motivated you to get out and vote, get informed, and learn the candidates' stances on these important issues. So with that, I'll pass it along, and I'll be stoked to answer some questions in a little bit.
Great, thank you very much, Josh, and thanks for all your hard work in Utah protecting Bears Ears. I'm going to turn it over now to Lois to talk about the fight to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Josh. I work in the I'm the National Field Organizer for Alaska Wilderness League, but I work out of Minnesota, my office here, and I just want to acknowledge that the lands that my office are on are lands that were stolen from the Dakota people. So I'm very blessed to be able to live here and live on these lands, and know that I work as an ally and in partnership with a tribal work to protect these lands, as well as where I'm going to talk about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But very amazing historical and present day connection that the Dakota people have with the lands here along the Minnesota River. Arctic Refuge, a very huge fight that we have right now. It's more threatened, more critically threatened than it has been for many decades. And as you can see on the title slide, it's a place where a lot of our issues interconnect. You can go to the next slide. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is in the northeast corner of Alaska. It's up on the very top of the state. It's 19.6 million acres, so it's a huge landscape that's pristine wildlands with many different types of ecosystems within it. Very healthy and vibrant populations of wildlife are still there, and it has not been hit by any kind of development at this point. What you see in the cross lines there is actually protected permanently as wilderness. But these are the homelands of the Gwich'in Indigenous Nation, which you saw a lot in the film. The story that Bernadette was telling about her lands and her cultural connections to these places. The most threatened place, and I think we can hit, is the coastal plain. So that's outlined there in the red. It's called 1002 because of a bill that it was Section 1002 that set aside that as a separate place for, it's protected as wilderness, but it was actually set aside as a future Congress to make the final decision whether it should be permanently protected as the wilderness in the crosshatch or open for oil and gas. And so that's why we've been under this controversy ever since. But this is bipartisan issue. I mean, it was kind of mentioned in the film that traditionally there was a bipartisan efforts to protect our public lands across the country. Theodore Roosevelt first created the National Wildlife Refuge System in 1903, and this is a part of that system now. But in 1960, President Eisenhower, another Republican, set aside that northeast corner of Alaska as a protected wildlife range. So at the time it was protected from development since the 60s. So it's been a long battle we've had to protect this area. In 1980, President Carter, a Democrat, added it to the National Wildlife Refuge System and increased the size. And that is how it became part of what's now federally managed wildlife lands that belong to all of us. We all have a voice in how they're managed. And it's set aside primarily as a refuge for wildlife. We can go to the next slide. The wild heart of this place is the coastal plain that you heard so much about in the film. And it is the place where the porcupine caribou herd, they're called porcupine because of a river they cross on their migration to get to this coastal plain. That's where they go to have their young. So it is a sacred land to the Gwich'in Nation, very important. This is also the place where industry wants to get in to develop. We can go to the next slide. Healthy, vibrant populations of all kinds of iconic species, some found nowhere else in the US, like the polar bear and the muskox, you know, but all of the species up there are healthy and vibrant populations. Over 200 species call the refuge home. We can go to the next slide. Ancient muskox, these are creatures that still are wild in the Arctic refuge. They're developed for the intense temperatures and ecosystem that's up there, but they've been there since the last ice age. This is a creature that's just still very vibrant in population. It's now being hit by climate change, but up until the last few decades, these guys have been amazing wildlife that we have there in the north coast of Alaska that we have no place else in the US. Next slide. And lots of birds. This is what connects us all to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Every state of the US shares bird migrations with birds that use the Arctic Refuge as part of their life year. And so we need to protect habitat there if we want to see the birds we see out of our windows. Every state of the US, as well as 6 continents of the world. So it's globally important bird habitat. Next slide. And it's also the most important land-ending habitat for the threatened polar bear. The polar bear was listed as a threatened species in 2007 because of climate change and the loss of the pack ice. So it's critically important we protect areas where they will come to land to den. And so that's another iconic species that we highlight and show that this is an amazingly important habitat for wildlife. Next slide. And of course, the caribou. And the caribou are the species that are so culturally, spiritually, economically, their livelihoods, their whole life is connected with the native tribe that's up there, the Gwich'in Nation. And the caribou have their young in the coastal plain of the refuge. They can travel thousands of miles to get there each year because it's a perfect nursery. It's a flat plain. They can see predators from long distances, so they can keep their young safe from the predators. Very intense 24-hour daylight in the summer times. It's land of the midnight sun, so the vegetation is very nutritious, and they can have calves and then regain their strength very quickly. There's the estimate of the population of the porcupine caribou herd is about 180,000 animals that are moving across this major migration, and they'll have like 90,000 calves within a 2-week period in this perfect coastal plain nursery. And it's also, because it is sandwiched, this area between a high mountain range, the Brooks Range Mountains, and the Arctic Ocean, it's a flat plain, but they can get up along that ocean, and that will keep the flies and mosquitoes and other bugs down off the young. So it's like, it's been this place that this caribou herd has returned to for thousands and thousands of years. Next slide. And they come in the thousands. They will travel up to 3,000 miles from their wintering grounds south of the refuge and in Canada up to that coastal plain. And the Gwich'in Nation used to travel with the caribou. They were kind of following them and nomadic. They have settled down in communities, and they have set up their communities along the migration routes of the caribou. Very few Gwich'in have actually been to that coastal plain. It's a sacred ground, the sacred place where life begins. But they do hunt the caribou as they're moving in and out of the refuge. And that's where their subsistence lifestyle has been based on. Next slide. The Gwich'in, their fate is definitely wrapped up with the protection of this place. If we lost the coastal plain to industry, the Fish and Wildlife Service has estimated that a 45% probably decline in the population of that caribou herd. If that was to happen, it would actually really impact this whole nation. These are their homelands where they've been interdependent for thousands of years. It's the sacred place where life begins, again, because the caribou have their calves there, but also many other species, the birds, the bears, the wolves, the moose. So it's very important habitat. And they have worked with us as partners for many years now to try to get this place permanently protected as a wilderness. Next slide. So the ways we are fighting back. Well, the film did talk about the bill that passed in 2017. The GOP, or the Republican Tax Act, had a few sentences in it that mandated lease sales in the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. And that's the critical threat we're under right now. The Trump administration has moved on a very fast track to try to get lease sales done up there in the first term, his first term. So we are still expecting something to happen before January. But we are in a place right now where they have gone through the environmental review, all of the National Environmental Policy Act process to look at what the impacts would be. Many people weighed in, over 2 million people commented, and 98% of those people were saying they would oppose any development up there. But so the comment periods are done. We're now fighting this in getting out of the administrative process a little bit, but fighting within the Congress, in the corporate boardrooms, and in the courts to try to stop this from going forward. I think we go to the next slide. Yeah, once people understand that this is a threat and this is going forward, overwhelmingly, they support protecting this area. They oppose opening it up to drilling. So we've had a number of polls done. It's independents, Democrats, even Republicans. Some of the more recent polls have shown majority of Republicans oppose development there, but you can see every walk of life broken down there. The problem is all of our voices really matter because we have to build the momentum. We have to get the word out that this is happening and it's moving so quickly. As soon as somebody understands that it's a threat, they care and they're concerned, but a lot of this is going under the radar and a lot of people are not aware that this is moving so quickly. So it's very important, again, to vote, yes, but also to get the word out. Talk to your friends and neighbors, talk to your networks, talk to your elected leaders. But we are definitely trying to, get the word out as much as possible, if it's through social media tools, writing letters to your local community papers. All of this is very important. These are national lands, national federal lands, and they are, all of us have a voice in how they're managed. Next slide. We're going to see a couple of the impacts that industry looks like. This is Prudhoe Bay, about 100 miles west of the Arctic Refuge. It's a huge network of roads, pipelines, drilling pads, places where people live. I mean, this is a dirty and very impactful and destructive kind of industry. Next slide. And we are trying to make sure that we keep it protected. So we're talking to Congress. This is the 3 areas we do have, through part of the process that's still going to happen with the administration. They need to put forward what's called a call for nominations. And it is going to be an open public process where public can weigh in, but it's also mainly set up so industry can say where they want to drill in the Arctic Refuge. But the call for nominations, we're expecting that announcement any day now. After that would follow an announcement of a lease sale and then the lease sale itself. So all of this could happen between now and the next administration. We are trying to work in Congress to continue to educate the senators. There's a bill that's mentioned on the screen, 2461. That's the Wilderness Act for the Arctic Refuge. So that's in the Senate. The House has already passed a very strong bill last session, so they have a bill that would be the companion for this that's already gone through the House side. But there is another bill that's been introduced, that's the Polar Bear Cub Survival Act. And so we are asking for members of Congress to sign on and co-sponsor that one as well. So senators and House members, there is a messaging kind of legislation that we can talk to them about and keep this issue on their radar through these bills. Probably wouldn't get across the finish line because of the administration we have right now, but hopefully if we get a change of administration, very quickly move within the next administration. We know that the Biden administration has already promised that within the first 100 days, if they get in, they would make sure something happens to protect the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. So we know we have that on the platform of a new administration. We are also working very strongly in other arenas that are more new to the wilderness fights that we've always been in before, but it's called the corporate campaign. We can go to the next slide. The corporate campaign, we are reaching out to banks, insurance companies, and oil companies to try to stop them from understanding the risks this would be to their bottom line. I mean, we want any company that wants to seek drilling in the Arctic Refuge to know that they will face enormous reputational risk, legal risk, as well as financial risks to try to go there. So the ways we are working with this is we are getting together. There's over 250 organizations, indigenous and conservation and business organizations, sent letters into the top insurance companies asking that they do not insure any projects or underwrite any projects in the coastal plain. We've been working with banks, in fact, over a dozen international and also 5 of the 6 big Minnesota or US banks have said that they will not finance any projects in the Arctic Refuge. So we just have to focus on Bank of America, get them across the finish line to pass a policy to join the rest of the banks to do this. And we're also working with oil companies. And recently through the Insure Our Future, there's a whole coalition of organizations, businesses, I mean, Patagonia is one of them, but 60 businesses that sent a letter to the oil companies saying, we will not go work with you to do any kind of development in the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. So we've got the oil companies on notice, we've got the insurance companies on notice, and of course the banks on notice. And this is a place where everyone can help us and reach out to these organizations. You'll find more information on our website. I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and the only other place that we're really fighting is in the courts. The Alaska Wilderness League joined on a lawsuit with the Gwich'in Steering Committee, and that is a challenge to the environmental review to the Trump administration. We're taking them to court because of the shoddy job they did. Other NGOs have also filed a lawsuit, and the Gwich'in tribes have filed a lawsuit, so there's actually 4. And attorney generals across the country, there's 15 states that have filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for moving forward with this project. And the Maine attorney general is on board with that, so they have signed on. So we do have challenges going on in the courts as well. But I just want to thank you for the chance to explain all this and talk to this today. And I guess I will pass it on to the next speaker.
Great, thank you very much, Lois. And thank you for all your hard work protecting the Arctic. It truly is a special place for everybody here in the United States and around the world. So next up is Alex Falconer, who's with Save the Boundary Waters, another spectacular part of the country that was featured in Public Trust. And Alex is here to talk a bit about their campaign to prevent metal mining in the Boundary Waters. So Alex, take it away. Alex, you're still muted. Yeah, there you go.
All right, hi, thanks. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm actually, if you can see my head here, I'm actually coming to you from right next to the Boundary Waters, which I thought was pretty cool. It's a beautiful day, fall day here, but the water flowing below me would be impacted by the mine site. That is the potential to destroy our beautiful place up north here. Also just the land acknowledgement, I'm on Ojibwe, Chippewa, Anishinaabe lands, and we fully acknowledge and realize the colonialism that led us to where we are right now in the current culture, and we're doing what we can to be allies with the Native communities and respect their traditions in this area. So if we go to the next slide. All right, so this is the mine site that we're looking at here. And I know the film featured some beautiful footage of the area, and so I don't have that many slides. I think the film spoke for itself for what this place looks like and what it means, especially from the fishing angle. But this just illustrates one key point here is that the Boundary Waters is 100% within the Superior National Forest. And the Superior National Forest has actually 20% of all the fresh water in the entire United States Forest Service lands. It's the most water-rich wilderness, freshwater wilderness in the country, and the potential for the acid mine drainage in the form of sulfuric acid to run out of the mine site, which would be located right here along this waterway, would be disastrous. And this where this picture is taken, all this water flows off the screen to the left and back and north, straight through the heart of the wilderness, also into Voyageurs National Park in northern Minnesota as well, and then all flows out Hudson Bay, north in Canada. I think this is a unique area where the water actually flows north instead of south. And people kind of conceive of Minnesota as either the Great Lakes, the Lake Superior Basin, or Mississippi watersheds, but all this water flows north and through the wilderness. The Boundary Waters itself is home to over 1,100 lakes, all of which is this interconnected water freshwater through streams, marshes, wetlands, other bodies of water, and that makes this mining proposal just such the disaster that it could be when you introduce this single point source of perpetual acid mine drainage. You're just going to see degradation of the water forever. The water is literally so clean you can drink out of the lakes just straight from it. Just stay away from beaver dams. Outside of that, though, you're good to go. I've been going to the Boundary Waters my entire life, and there's only a handful of times that I've ever had to filter the water, just because we found ourselves in a spot where our only source was a little bit too, the lake wasn't deep enough to make us comfortable, or again, we were near a beaver dam, and to avoid giardia, that just made the most sense. Yeah, let's just go to the next slide. This just highlights the threat here. The area that we were just looking at on the previous slide is right center, just north of the red dots there. The mining proposals, Antofagasta, Chilean mining company, looking to extract copper as the main source. Less than 0.5% of the ore that they would dig up is viable copper to them. The other 99.5% plus would be stored on the surface as waste rock and or backfilled into the mine site that they would propose, which just leaves this inevitable, just even after if the mine site were to close, aside from the pollution from an operating mine at the headwaters of the Boundary Waters, you're just going to have rain and snow, and it rains and snows a lot in Minnesota. That's just forever just going to be landing on and filtering through all the waste rock that's left there forever. And again, so then the maroon colors here we call it the path of pollution, illustrating where all this water flows north past these mine sites, straight into the wilderness, the dark green area, up into the Canadian Quetico through Voyageurs National Park. And that's really the big threat here. In addition to just the water quality, is the business aspect of this area. The Boundary Waters is home to is part of a $900 million a year economic activity that surrounds the wilderness. And Ely itself, the downtown of Ely is all outfitters, wilderness. It's a wilderness-based economy. You've got the outfitters, you've got the camps, you've got the services that support all of that. Within the Superior National Forest, outside the wilderness border, are people's homes, cabins, people that want to live in a nice, quiet, secluded area that is not a mining district. And on this path of pollution here, there's at least 30 businesses that would be directly impacted. But Harvard economists and others have, when they've looked at the economic scenarios of the potential of relieve this area of the threat of mining and leave it as is, or introduce a vast mining district, it's drastically underwater. Up to 4,600 jobs would be lost in the area. You'd lose between 100 million and close to $1 billion of economic activity every year, just in income. For this area, it's a jobs scenario that's underwater, particularly when we're talking about a Chilean mining company that would ship its ore off to China. So it's foreign profits and foreign processed ore that then U.S. companies would have to buy back from a global commodity market standpoint. So it's just economically not a viable project. It's terrible for the water. And the Boundary Waters was just named one of 13 dark sky sanctuaries in the country, or in the world. That's one of our latest big pieces of news. And a giant, vast industrial mine site would pollute the night sky, in addition to the air and the water and the noise pollution that would come along with it. So it's a disastrous project all around, and what we are mainly trying to prevent. Let's go to the next slide. So formally, before the pandemic, we were in DC about every month. One of the things that we've always done, we've called it patient persistence, of just always showing up. The campaign started out with just a few families in Ely that learned about this threat and started making some noise about it and formed our campaign. And we've grown substantially to now we are a nationwide coalition of over 300 businesses, nonprofits, and other organizations that want to protect the Boundary Waters. And one of these organizations is called Kids for the Boundary Waters, where yearly we fly out to DC, somewhere between 40 and 80 youth from across the country that want to protect this spot. And kids, if anybody has an option to involve kids as advocates for your cause, they are just an incredible messenger. I tell you, I go to DC. I used to go to DC every month, and it was few and far between when I myself or just even business leaders from Ely, Minnesota, could get an in-person meeting with a congressman or a senator, congressperson or a senator. Our hit ratio on getting an actual member of Congress itself with these kids is about 30%. About 1 in 3 of our meetings, because you can't have a bunch of kids show up from Wisconsin saying, "Hey, Senator Johnson, meet with me," and he's going to turn them down. So. It's great FaceTime, and their staff definitely pay attention when their boss takes a meeting, and you can have years of follow up with that office in a direct line sense as part of that. So we are in DC constantly. We have a bill in Congress right now, HR 5598, that would permanently ban the sort of mining in the watershed of the Boundary Waters and Voyageurs National Park. It's in the House. It was introduced bipartisan, has 47 co-sponsors. We're anticipating Natural Resources Committee action still before the end of the year, and we're aggressively trying to get a bill introduced in the Senate as well. Aside from that, we're involved in several lawsuits, both at the national and state level, and just doing everything that we can to keep this project from ever happening. That's a lot of the story I just wanted to tell. The next slide, this just goes back to kind of what we are looking at. You wouldn't know, but this is both the United States and Canada. And just demonstrating here how much water is in this area. And it turns out water doesn't adhere to artificial lines on a map. And so when you're polluting a large body of water that flows into the next, that pollution goes along with it. It's going to damage the entire ecosystem, from the fish to the birds, the eagles and the loons that feed on the fish, to the wolves that feed on the beavers that swim through the water, to everything. That's all a part of this. It's all interconnected. So just want to thank you for giving the time that you gave me today. And I'd love to answer any questions in the Q&A portion of this.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alex. And thanks for all your hard work protecting the boundary waters. So before I get into the public land that we have here in Maine, I wanted to make the connection between Alex's presentation about fighting mines, and here in Maine, NRCM has been on the front lines of defending against mining pollution as well. So this is a picture of Bald Mountain. It's in Aroostook County. Its closest town that you might have heard of is Ashland, Maine, in Aroostook County. And this is a picture that I took from the sky in a little 2-seater airplane back in 2014. So you might remember that J.D. Irving, the largest landowner here in Maine, had proposed to open a 650-acre sulfide metal mine right here in the heart of the Fish River, and primarily to mine for gold, copper, and zinc. The ore at Bald Mountain at that particular site is high in sulfides. And as I mentioned, it would threaten the headwaters of the Fish River, which is famous for its brook trout population. So back in 2014, when J.D. Irving was interested in mining at this site, Maine had some pretty strict mining laws on the books. They were written in 1990, but J.D. Irving petitioned the state legislature and convinced the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, which was then on part of the Paul LePage administration, to go back to the drawing board and rewrite the state's mining laws. The Maine DEP came forward with extremely weak proposed mining laws, and NRCM and many other groups rallied, especially a lot of folks in Aroostook County, to push back. And after years of back and forth, after the 2016 election, NRCM actually worked with Senator Brownie Carson, who was the executive director of NRCM for 27 years before serving in the state legislature in the Senate. We worked with Senator Carson to draft a strong mining law, which eventually passed. So as a result, Maine now has the strongest metal mining law in the whole country. Our mining laws ban open pit mining. We ban mining on or under public lands, lakes, outstanding rivers, and coastal waters. We ban mines that would require treatment in perpetuity. We have a ban on tailings impoundments, and a requirement that mining companies can prove that they have enough financial resources to clean up after their mining operation, which is good news because more recently, just this past January, a company called Wolfton Resources which is an Ontario-based company with no successful mining experience, submitted a rezoning petition to the Land Use Planning Commission for a metal mine at Pickett Mountain, which they're proposing a 528-acre site in Mount Chase, which is not far from Baxter State Park and the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So NRCM is very concerned about this mining proposal. We have identified serious flaws in Wolfden's rezoning petition, including a failure to prove that it can treat wastewater accurately, disrespect for Maine's mining laws and rules. They're trying to get away with skirting Maine's mining laws, and a failure to demonstrate that they have the financial capacity to clean up their mess. So NRCM is continuing to lead this fight to educate Mainers about this disastrous proposal and continuing to fight back. So just wanted to mention a couple places where we're fighting mining here in Maine. So jumping into the federal lands that we have here in Maine, again, none of these were featured in the film, besides Acadia, very briefly. But Maine has very little federal public land as opposed to Alaska and Utah, which both states are about 60% federal land. Maine, by comparison, is about 1% federal public land. So it's a pretty small amount. So to start with a couple of places you might not be as familiar with, the Caribou Speckled Wilderness is a mountain wilderness area. It's about 11,000 acres located within the White Mountain National Forest, right on the Maine-New Hampshire border. And the property is centered around two mountains, Caribou Mountain and Speckled Mountain. And they're each separated by a 4-mile rugged trail. NRCM was actually a part of the effort to establish the Caribou Speckled Wilderness area in the 1990s. And the people of Maine actually passed a referendum at the ballot in 1990 to establish this wilderness area. And it's one of the only places in Maine that's actually designated as wilderness. Moving on, the Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge consists of nearly 30,000 acres of federally protected lands. This is in Washington County, down east. The refuge's landscape is varied with rolling hills and large ledge outcroppings and a northern hardwood forest. So this is a place that you might not be as familiar with, but the tide actually fluctuates 24 feet twice a day when the tide goes in and out. So it's one of the highest tide fluctuations on the East Coast. So now a few more places you might be more familiar with. Of course, the Allagash Wilderness Waterway is a 92-mile long waterway that is part of the National Wild and Scenic River System. Protection of the Allagash was actually the issue that NRCM was founded on in 1959. Of course, if you've been down to the Allagash, you know how spectacular it is. You can do the entire 92 miles. It'll take you about a week, or you could do several day trips. Either way, it's a spectacular place here in Maine. The waterway is really one of Maine's signature natural features. So following a multi-year campaign, which was led by NRCM, the Allagash Wilderness Waterway was established in 1966 by the Maine State Legislature. And as a result of the hard work of former Maine Senator Ed Muskie, on July 19, 1970, the Allagash was designated as a wild and scenic river as part of the National Wild and Scenic River System. This meant that it would be kept generally inaccessible except by trail. And the last thing I'll mention is that this is the 50th anniversary of the Allagash's wild and scenic designation. So we continue to celebrate that today. And of course, the Appalachian Trail, more than 280 miles of the AT run through Maine. Of course, either starting or ending at Mount Katahdin, depending on which direction you're going. The AT is managed by the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and of course, thousands of volunteers every single year. So now the places that you've definitely heard of that are federal public lands here in Maine, of course, Acadia National Park. Most of us have probably on this program tonight have probably been to Acadia. It's one of the signature places, one of the signature natural features here in Maine. It's one of the smallest national parks. It's also one of the most visited national parks. As we know, it includes beautiful mountains, a beautiful coastline, a coniferous forest, The entire national park is 49,000 acres. So it's about 76 square miles. So it's, again, it's one of the smallest national parks in the country. Just kind of skip through some beautiful pictures. I'm sure we've all been to many of these places. Tourism, of course, is a huge part of Acadia and of Hancock County's economy. In 2018, more than 3.5 million people visited Acadia National Park and generated more than $387 million in the state. That spending resulted in more than 5,600 jobs. Again, Acadia is just a critical part of Maine's economy, especially the economy down east. So while Acadia has been around for more than 100 years, the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument is one of the newest national monuments here in the country. Again, it was established by President Obama on August 24th of 2016. So we just celebrated the 4-year anniversary of KWW. And Bears Ears was created just a few months after Katahdin Woods and Waters. So the monument is about 87,000 acres with mountains and forests and 3 different rivers. And it's located on the eastern border of Baxter State Park. So, while Acadia showcases the beauty of Maine's coast, KWW, highlights the beauty of Maine's inland waters and forests. You have stunning views of Mount Katahdin on the monument. One of the big features of the monument is a 17-mile loop road with lots of beautiful viewpoints, plenty of trails. It is a brand new national monument, and so the infrastructure is still getting there. But it is a beautiful place to visit all 4 seasons. Some of the best cross-country skiing I've ever experienced in Maine has been at the National Monument. So again, this is the 4th year of the National Monument. However, when candidate Trump was stumping in Maine in 2016, he was pretty critical of the monument's creation by the Obama administration just a few months before they left office. So there was real concern in the first few years after Katahdin Woods and Waters was established that it could be shrunk or rolled back. Then Governor Paul LePage actually flew down to Washington, D.C. To actually be with President Trump and to lobby him to roll back or to shrink KWW. And he was actually at the signing of the executive order to review all national monuments 100,000 acres or larger. Then Governor LePage was really leading the effort to roll back the monument. In 2017, then Department of Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke actually visited the KWW monument. In a 2017 report, Zinke did not recommend that President Trump roll back or rescind the monument. Instead, made some suggestions to the management plan to increase forestry. But NRCM and others mounted a huge campaign to both establish the national monument, to convince the federal government to accept this generous donation of 87,000 acres as part of the park system. And we mounted a big campaign to protect the national monument when it was threatened by the Trump administration. So this is my last slide. It shows that almost 100%, 99.96% of comments that were received by the Department of the Interior favored keeping the national monument. And just in the last 4 years, visitation to the monument has been increasing every single year, and the local economy is already starting to benefit. So that is the end of our slides. And before we get into Q&A, I know we're running a little bit behind here, and hopefully our speakers can stick on for just a few more moments past 7 o'clock. But I want to welcome in actually a surprise guest speaker. He was in the film. He is a proud Mainer. He lives in Wayne, Maine. If you tuned into the Evening for the Environment last night, you would have seen him. He is Joel Clement, the whistleblower from the Department of the Interior. So Joel, welcome in. Thanks for being here this evening. And how did you enjoy the film?
Oh, thanks, Todd. It's good to be here, and greetings from Wayne, Maine. Like the rest of Maine, the ancestral home of the Wabanaki Confederacy. It's good to be part of this event. And yeah, I have seen the film. And it's impressive and it's sad and it's horrifying, but in some ways very invigorating when we talk about the role of public lands, even though they may not be necessarily derived from all good actions in history. But I'm in the film because of my role as a whistleblower. I worked at Interior as the director of the policy office and ran afoul of the Trump administration. So Todd, I don't know, I think you guys are running a bit behind. I'm happy to say a few things about that, but also willing to give my time back so you can get some more Q&A going.
Sure. Well, thanks, Joel. So hold on for just a moment. So again, if folks have questions for either of our speakers, please type them in the Q&A box. I don't see any questions right now. So Joel, I'm gonna have you continue your talk, but folks, if you have questions, please type them in that Q&A box and we can get to them after Joel's presentation.
That sounds good, and I'm happy to break at any time. So, but I will just say in a minute or two that, you know, during the Obama years, the Interior Department made a lot of important decisions about protecting the lands that you've talked about here tonight. And when Trump was elected, once many of us as career staff at the agency got over the trauma of election night, I kind of thought we'd be okay. We'd heard they don't care one bit about climate change, but of course they won't turn their backs on people who are vulnerable and imperiled by the impacts of climate change. And of course, that's where I was naive and wrong. I spent a lot of my time working at Interior as the climate policy advisor, but also working with the people of the Arctic, and particularly those villages along the coast imperiled by coastal erosion, big storms, and sea level rise. They're in danger of being wiped right off the map. So we needed to pay close attention to that, see what kind of resources we could cut loose to help them relocate these villages. And the new administration, the Trump administration, had no interest in that and quickly sidelined those of us doing that work. And as a senior executive, they reassigned me to the office that collects royalty checks from the oil and gas companies for public lands drilling. So clearly that was meant to get me to quit, and that's not how you're supposed to do things. And so I blew the whistle, not just because of the insult to my position and my job, but because they were clearly forsaking a lot of Americans who were in danger, and they were directly affecting those livelihoods and lives. So I left, and I stuck around for a couple of months and then eventually left. I think you can still find my resignation letter on the Washington Post website if you want to read about it. But, you know, it became very clear they had no intention of addressing climate change. In fact, they were planning to roll back and have been rolling back many of the things that were done during the Obama administration and prior to protect public lands, to protect Americans, and to keep us safe. So they've been detonating all of these important rules and regulations, and in the process, putting these precious places at risk. And it's mortifying. I'm not proud to say I'm working in Massachusetts. As a Mainer, that's tough to say, but I work at the Harvard Belfer Center now on these same issues, on Arctic and climate change issues. So I'm able to still do the work. But boy, the folks that are stealing government still at Interior, especially the scientists and experts, have been marginalized, and they're really up against it there. So it's tough to see, and certainly we all hope there'll be a change soon so that people can get back to business of serving the public and serving these lands and the tribes in ways that they are meant to be served.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Joel, for all your work, and you make us Mainers proud. So thank you for speaking out and blowing the whistle and sticking true to your values. So we really appreciate it, and thanks for being here with us this evening.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah, great. We have a couple of questions rolling in. Alex, this first one is for you. Comes from Pete. The question is, what level of support or opposition does the proposed mine in the Boundary Waters, what kind of support or opposition does it have from the residents and the politicians in Minnesota?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. In Minnesota, we have recent polling that 70% of Minnesotans want the Boundary Waters protected. And the messaging, there's a significant chunk of the remaining 30% that are undecided. Perhaps they haven't heard of the issue or don't know, they're not familiar enough to get an educated guess. So there's a large chunk of those that are persuadable with proper messaging when the polling battery goes through those sort of questions and demonstrates that. But straight up 70% are against it. which is a huge number in itself. I mean, there's almost no other issue in the state or the country that can garner 70% support. In the 8th Congressional District of Northeastern Minnesota, where we are, this is a traditional iron ore mining area. There's taconite mining that's been going on for 100+ years, and it's the culture and the bedrock of what built many of these local towns nearby. This sort of mining, though, is not iron ore mining, it's sulfide or copper mining. It's a completely different animal. And sulfide or copper mining across the country has always polluted. It's just an inevitable fact that sulfates react with water so readily. And even so, just given the history of the mining in this district, the majority, 56%, are opposed to this project as well. So the district itself, the communities that are directly impacted, majority are against, and then overwhelming support to protect the boundary waters across the state.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So Josh, this next question is for you. It comes from Leslie. Question is, what is the best path for success in overturning the rollbacks of Bears Ears boundaries? What's our best path to success at protecting Bears Ears?
Voting in November.
You can certainly echo
Very
that.
quick answer. I mean, we have a court case that is in front of the district court right now. We feel like we have a super strong case with just the precedent and all sorts of legal scholars. But the reality is, with the politicization of our court system, and that just got worse this last week, if anybody's been watching the news, you know, the best chance is democracy.
Absolutely. Yeah, just, you know, to put a finer note on that, you know, you can, here in Maine, you can request your absentee ballot now. We're encouraging people to vote by absentee ballot this year, in large part because of COVID. It's also very safe and secure and inconvenient. Absentee ballots will be mailed out starting on October 3rd. So if you request yours now, you'll be amongst one of the first people in Maine to get your absentee ballot. So absolutely make sure you request your ballot, or go to the polls on November 3rd if you prefer to go in person. So Alex, this next question is for you. The question is from Jackie, who asks, since Canada's waters would also be affected by mining in the boundary waters, could Canada be brought into this fight? And if they are already part of the fight, how so?
Sure, that's a great question. If we had an administration that cared what Canada thought, that might help. Canada has raised concerns about this project. They wrote a letter to our government during a public comment period that our federal government had about this project, where they outlined their concerns, and they asked that our State Department respond to theirs, detailing how they were not going to allow Canadians' waters to be polluted. It's a highly unusual circumstance where a foreign government will submit a public comment in in one of our public comment periods revolving a vast, you know, mining district project. So that step alone got the attention of Congress. Representative McCollum has introduced a couple of provisions in appropriations bills. She's the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Interior. So she holds the purse strings for, you know, the Department of the Interior and the BLM. And she has language in there that would defund any study of this bill, of this project, or leasing potential from the federal government for this project, as well as in the state and foreign ops appropriations bill has $1 million dedicated that the State Department has to answer the Canadian question there. So it's a way of forcing our government to actually take into account Canada's concerns and try to come up with some sort of answer on how they're not going to pollute Canada's waters. But we are engaged in other levels too. The elected officials right across the border have engaged with us and have elevated their concerns to the federal government of Canada. The Canadian Sierra Club, for example, we have a lot of people within our coalition that have signed our petitions that have signed up to support this cause too. So to varying degrees, we are working with Canadians and NGOs and the government. But since this is such a heavy U.S. federal project. I mean, the bulk of our work is just trying to get our federal government to listen to the American people.
Great. So this is going to be the last question of the evening. We're already past 7 o'clock, and really appreciate our panelists sticking on a little bit later, although you're in different time zones. So, but this last question is for you, Joel. It comes from Matt. The question is about the status of your whistleblower lawsuit against the Department of the Interior, protesting their attempt to reassign you to an accounting job, like you described in the movie. So what's the status of your whistleblower complaint, your lawsuit?
Well, I lodged that complaint with the Office of Special Counsel, which is an independent agency within the executive branch. And it's not the same as the special counsel that Mueller operated within. It's a separate office, and it's still under investigation. So, I get a notice every month or two that says, hey, we're still working on this. And the reason for that is because there are hundreds of such complaints for them to deal with right now. This administration has shown no reluctance to break a lot of rules, both ethics and rules and actual laws. So that is a very, very busy office, and they're trying to cover a lot of complaints. So I assume it's for that reason. They're still working on mine. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people asking questions down the road. What's happened to some of these things? Because, man, there's been just a rash of bad behavior within the Trump administration.
Absolutely. Well, this is going to conclude our program. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us tonight and zooming in from different parts of the country and different time zones. And thanks to everybody who joined us here on the program tonight. We hope that you enjoyed Public Trust, the new film from Patagonia. I know I certainly enjoyed it. You'll all receive an email tomorrow from me with a link to watch the recording of this program and share it with your friends. And again, remember to vote on November 3rd or request your absentee ballot today, because this election, like all elections, will have massive implications for our environment here in Maine, in Minnesota, in Utah, in Alaska, and every state in the country. So absolutely make sure that you vote this November. And thanks again for joining us. Have a great evening.